They gave my $80 billion company to my brother. Then the buyer stood up. The room went completely silent. I remember that silence more clearly than anything else that happened that night. My father stood at the head of the dining table, one hand resting on the back of his chair, while my mother sat beside him with a smile that seemed strangely calm. My brother Henry was sitting across from me. He looked excited. Too excited. My father lifted his glass. "We're handing all 80 billion to Henry," he announced. I stared at him. For a few seconds I honestly thought I had misunderstood him. 80 billion? I whispered. My father nodded. "To Henry." Then he looked directly at me. "Now leave. You're exiled." My heart seemed to stop. I looked around the table. No one laughed. No one corrected him. My mother simply smiled. I slowly placed my fork on the plate. "So," I said, keeping my voice steady, "you sold the company?" Henry leaned back in his chair. "Our company," he corrected. I looked at him. Then at my parents. "You sold the company without my patents?" My mother chuckled. "We sold our business." I felt something cold settle inside me. For 15 years I had built that company. I had worked through nights when everyone else was asleep. I had written the first prototype in a tiny apartment. I had taken rejection after rejection. I had invested my savings when the company had almost nothing. And now, apparently, my family had decided that Henry deserved all of it. I looked toward the end of the table. A man in a dark suit had been sitting quietly beside the company's legal advisor. I recognized him. He was the buyer. The man who had supposedly just purchased our company for $80 billion. Until that moment he hadn't said a single word. But then he slowly stood up. Actually, everyone turned toward him. He looked at my father. Then my mother. Then Henry. And finally he looked at me. "You're making one very important mistake." My father frowned. "What mistake?" The buyer placed a folder on the table. "You didn't sell me the company." Henry laughed nervously. "Of course we did." The buyer shook his head. "No." He opened the folder. "You sold me the assets that belong to your family holding company." My father stared at him. "And what's the difference?" The buyer looked directly at me. "The difference is that the patents, core technology, research rights, and controlling intellectual property were never owned by the holding company." My mother stopped smiling. Henry's face changed. I leaned forward. "Then who owns them?" The buyer answered with one sentence. "Emma." My own name echoed through the room. I couldn't speak. My father stood completely still. Henry suddenly pushed his chair backward. "That can't be right." The buyer closed the folder. "It is." My father looked at me. For the first time that evening, there was fear in his eyes. But I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Because I had spent 15 years believing that my family was the one place where I didn't have to protect myself. And that night I realized I had been wrong. ## Chapter 1. The beginning. 15 years earlier, there was no $80 billion company. There was only a small office above a grocery store. The office had 2 desks, one broken coffee machine, and a window that wouldn't close properly. That was where I started. My father had already built a successful business by then. He was respected in our city. People knew the Harrison family. We owned several properties, investments, and companies. My brother Henry was 4 years older than me. Everyone assumed Henry would eventually inherit everything. I never complained about that. I didn't want an inheritance. I wanted to build something myself. When I was 22, I developed a new technology that could dramatically improve the way large businesses manage their energy systems. The idea was simple. The execution was incredibly difficult. I spent months testing the first version. Most of my early experiments failed. Sometimes I worked for 20 hours without sleeping. Sometimes I wondered if I was wasting my life. But eventually the system worked. I showed my father. He looked at the demonstration and smiled. "You're good at this," he said. That sentence meant everything to me. I thought he was proud. I thought he believed in me. He offered to invest. I accepted. But I insisted on one condition. The intellectual property stays with me. My father agreed. Of course. I trusted him. That was my first mistake. ## Chapter 2. The company grew quickly. At first we had 10 employees. Then 50. Then hundreds. Within 5 years, our technology was being used by major organizations around the world. Investors came. Banks came. Business magazines wrote about us. Our company became one of the fastest-growing technology businesses in the industry. And Henry? He wasn't interested in the technology. He preferred the business side. He attended meetings. He wore expensive suits. He gave interviews. Whenever journalists asked who founded the company, he would smile. Our family built it. I didn't correct him. I thought we were a team. I thought there was enough success for everyone. Then something changed. The company became extremely valuable. And Henry became increasingly interested in control. One afternoon he came into my office. "You should step back," he said. I looked up from my laptop. "Step back from what?" "Operations." I laughed. "Why?" "Because you're too emotionally involved." I stared at him. "I created the technology. And I've helped build the business." "I never said you didn't." Henry leaned against the desk. "You're not seeing the bigger picture." "What bigger picture?" He smiled. "The company is becoming too valuable for one person to control." I understood immediately. "You mean me?" He didn't answer. Chapter 3. The family decision. A few months later, my parents invited me to dinner. They said they wanted to discuss the future of the company. I expected a normal business conversation. Instead, my father placed several documents on the table. "We've received an offer," he said. "How much?" He looked at me. 80 billion. I froze. "That much?" My mother nodded. "It is an extraordinary opportunity." I turned toward Henry. "And what happens after the sale?" Henry smiled. "We all benefit." I picked up one of the documents. But something didn't look right. I read the details carefully. The transaction involved the company's physical assets, certain subsidiaries, real estate and financial holdings. But I couldn't find the patents. "Where is the intellectual property?" My father looked away. "That's being handled separately." "By whom?" He didn't answer. I looked at my mother. She said quietly, "Don't make this difficult, Emma." That was the moment I knew something was wrong. I stood up. "I want to see every agreement." My father slammed his hand against the table. "You don't trust your own family?" I looked at him. "I trust documents more than promises." Henry laughed. "You always were dramatic." I left the house that night. I didn't know that would be the last time I would enter it as a daughter. Chapter 4. The dinner. 2 weeks later, my parents invited me to another dinner. That was the night from the beginning. The buyer was there. The lawyers were there. Henry was there. And my parents made their announcement. "We're handing all 80 billion to Henry." I couldn't believe it. Then my father told me to leave. He said I was no longer part of the family business. My mother told me they had sold their company. I asked the question that changed everything. "You sold the company without my patents?" The buyer stood up. Actually, that word changed the entire room. He explained that the company could not legally transfer the core intellectual property without my authorization. The $80 billion deal was built around an assumption. The buyer believed the family had complete control. But the documents showed otherwise. My patents were held separately. And the licensing agreements gave me controlling rights over the technology. Without those rights, the company they had sold was worth a fraction of the advertised price. Henry looked at the buyer. "You're saying the deal is worthless?" The buyer shook his head. "I'm saying the deal is incomplete." My father turned toward me. "Emma, we can fix this." I almost laughed. "Fix what?" "This misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding." My voice was calm. "You tried to sell something you didn't own." Chapter 5. The offer. The buyer closed the folder. "I came here tonight prepared to complete the acquisition." Everyone looked at him. "But after reviewing the ownership structure, I have another proposal." Henry immediately stepped forward. "What proposal?" The buyer ignored him. He looked at me. "I want to work with you directly." My father became furious. "She is part of our family." The buyer replied calmly. "Family relationships have nothing to do with ownership." Nobody spoke. He continued. "I don't need your family's holding company. I need the technology. And the technology belongs to Emma." Henry shook his head. "This is ridiculous." The buyer looked at him. "No. What's ridiculous is assuming a person's work disappears simply because her family doesn't respect her." Those words hit me harder than I expected. For 15 years I had wondered whether I was being selfish. Whether I should accept whatever my family offered. Whether I should stay quiet for the sake of peace. But suddenly I understood something. Keeping peace is not the same as accepting injustice. Chapter 6. The choice. The buyer offered me a partnership. Not a job. Not a position under Henry. A partnership. He wanted to rebuild the company around the technology one had created. I could have accepted immediately. Said I asked one question. What happens to the employees? He answered, they keep their jobs. And the research team? Expanded. And the customers? Protected. And Henry? The buyer paused. That's up to you. I looked across the table. Henry wasn't the confident man from earlier anymore. He looked frightened. My father was silent. My mother was crying. For years I had imagined what I would say if my family ever betrayed me. Thought I would scream. I thought I would demand revenge. But when the moment finally came I felt strangely calm. I turned toward Henry. You wanted the company. He nodded slowly. You can have what's yours. He looked confused. What does that mean? It means I won't fight you for the buildings, the cars, the offices, or whatever else you believe belongs to you. My father looked surprised. But the technology, I shook my head. That was never yours. Chapter 7. The second. Beginning the next morning, I went back to the small office where I had started 15 years earlier. It was still there. The same narrow window. The same old desk. The same coffee machine. I sat down. For the first time in years I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. I opened my laptop. Then I started again. Not from zero. From experience. Within 6 months, the new company had attracted several major investors. Within a year, its valuation surpassed the company my family had sold. But something more important happened. I changed the culture. Employees weren't treated like numbers. Researchers received ownership opportunities. Young engineers were encouraged to challenge senior management. And nobody was allowed to take credit for someone else's work. One of my first decisions was creating a founders recognition program. Every major innovation received the name of the person who created it. When the board asked why I cared so much about that, I gave them a simple answer. Because people deserve to see their own names on the work they sacrificed for. Chapter 8. The call. Almost 2 years later, my phone rang. It was my mother. I almost didn't answer. But I did. Emma. Yes. There was a long silence. Then she said, your father wants to talk to you. I closed my eyes. About what? He wants to apologize. I didn't answer. She continued. We were wrong. I looked out the window. Outside, my new company was alive with activity. People were walking between buildings. Engineers were testing new systems. Employees were laughing in the cafeteria. It was everything I had dreamed about. But hearing my mother admit they were wrong still hurt. I finally said, I don't need an apology to move forward. He started crying. I know. What do you need? Her voice broke. To know whether you're okay. I thought about that question. Then I answered honestly. Yes. I am. Chapter 9. The final meeting. A few weeks later, I agreed to meet my parents. Not at our old family house. Not at my office. We met at a quiet restaurant. My father looked older. Henry was there too. He didn't say much. After several minutes, my father finally spoke. I thought I was protecting the family. I looked at him. From what? From losing control. I nodded. And that's why you tried to take control away from me? He looked down. I thought Henry was better suited to lead. I smiled sadly. You never asked me what I wanted. He didn't respond. Then Henry spoke. I was jealous. I looked at him. He continued. You had something everyone respected. I had the family name, but you had the thing people actually admired. He took a breath. I wanted what you had. For the first time I believed him. Not because I trusted him completely, but because he finally stopped pretending. I said, you could have asked me for help. I know. You could have built something of your own. I know. You didn't have to destroy my trust to feel important. He nodded. I know that now. Chapter 10. What I learned. People often asked me what I did after my family tried to take my company. They expected a dramatic answer. They expected revenge. They expected me to say that I destroyed them. But I never did. I didn't need to. The best revenge wasn't watching my family struggle. It wasn't humiliating Henry. It wasn't proving my parents wrong. The best revenge was building something so meaningful that I no longer needed their approval. I learned 3 lessons. The first was simple. Never confuse family with ownership. Love can be unconditional. Business cannot. If money, property, patents, or companies are involved, everything should be documented clearly. The second lesson was harder. Being loyal doesn't mean being silent. I spent years avoiding difficult conversations because I wanted peace. But silence doesn't always create peace. Sometimes it simply gives other people room to make decisions for you. And the third lesson changed my life completely. Your value doesn't disappear because someone refuses to recognize it. My family had told me to leave. They thought they were removing me from my own story. Instead, they accidentally gave me the freedom to write the next chapter myself. #epilogue 5 years after that dinner, I returned to the old family home. The house looked exactly the same. But I felt completely different. My father opened the door. He smiled. "Welcome home." I stood there for a moment. Then I smiled back. "Thank you." We had dinner together. There were no business documents on the table. No negotiations. No arguments about money. Just a family eating together. Before I left, my father stopped me. "Emma." I turned around. He looked at me. "I should have been proud of you from the beginning." I smiled. "You were supposed to be." He nodded. "I know." I hugged him. Not because I had forgotten what happened. And not because everything was magically repaired. I hugged him because forgiveness for me wasn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It was about refusing to let the past control the rest of my life. As I walked outside, I looked back at the house one final time. Years ago, I had left that same house believing I had lost everything. I was wrong. I hadn't lost my future. I had only lost the people who wanted to control it. And sometimes, losing control of your old life is exactly what you need to finally build your own. The end.